Welcome, my name is Joel Obermayer. I'm delighted to have you here, and in a moment you'll meet two extraordinary Obermayer Award winners. They are Sabeth Schmidthals, a high school teacher, history teacher who works mainly with students from immigrant families. She is joining us from Berlin, Germany. And there you are. Hi, Sabeth. And also Friederike Fechner, a professional cellist and member of her city's local parliament. She's joining us from Stralsund, Germany, which is in the north of the country on the Baltic coast. Hello, Friederike.
Hello.
You'll get a chance to hear from this shortly. First, I just want to tell you a little bit about Widen the Circle. So Widen the Circle was founded in 2019. Our mission is to combat hate through a shared understanding of the past. We shine a light on individuals and groups working at the ground level in their communities to fight hate and to confront history that led to prejudice and persecution. Our work is based on 2 decades of lessons we've learned from the Obermayer Awards, which we still run today. As some here know, the Obermayer Awards were founded by my father and mother, Arthur and Judith Obermayer, and my mother's actually here today, which is great. The awards honor extraordinary German non-Jews who have worked creatively and selflessly to raise awareness of Jewish history and culture in their local communities, and to use that history to fight the rise of hate, prejudice, and anti-Semitism. And the awards are given out annually at the Berlin Parliament. Now, we've learned a powerful lesson from the awards program. Helping people understand history as it occurred in their own communities has a great power to change how people view the world. It has the power to begin healing wounds that go back generations, and it has the power to counter stereotypes and prevent prejudice from taking root. Our vision for Widen the Circle is a dynamic organization that expands this use of local history in Germany, in Germany, the US, and beyond, something particularly important with the rising tide of right-wing hate in so many places. Let me just pause for a second. Maya, are we recording? Yes, good.
Yeah, we're recording, Joel, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Widen the Circle has been building a growing network of more than 100 activists and educators in Germany, including many Obermayer Award winners. These are people working at the grassroots level in their own communities and regions. The network helps them exchange knowledge, collaborate on new projects, and engage more people in remembrance work in fighting modern prejudice. They confront tough and essential challenges, things like how do we make the past come alive for young people? What do we do about a world full of false, distorted views of history, including those that deny the Holocaust? Our visiting program brings international thought leaders to Berlin for a week-long immersive experience that enables participants to look at modern issues of prejudice in new ways. And we certainly plan to run this program again when the pandemic is over. These leaders serve as mentors and advisors to members of our network and to us. Bridge building is our newest program, and we know that in Germany and the US, people who are confronting a history of racism and prejudice are facing many of the same challenges, even though the contexts are different. In fact, Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, has told us that some of his groundbreaking work on lynchings was inspired by the work of Obermayer Award winners. And we are building bridges to foster communication and learning, and we see lots and lots of potential here. All of our work is devoted to inspiring and empowering people like Sabeth and Friederike, both of whom won Obermayer Awards. And now I'd like to help you get to know them. So I'm going to ask both of them some questions to get the conversation started, and then invite you to engage in dialogue with them. So without any further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start Sabeth. I'm going to start with Sabeth Schmidthals. Sabeth is a high school teacher in Berlin. She won an Obermayer Award in 2020, and she's developed an innovative approach to teaching Jewish history and the history of the Holocaust to students who are largely from immigrant families. In her high school in a Moabite neighborhood, about 80% of the students have their roots in other countries. The majority are Muslim, and many of them are from the Middle East. In 2015, she started a remembrance working group, which is kind of like an extracurricular club, really, which includes students and alumni, and it helps them connect very deeply with what happened to Jews in their neighborhood during the Nazi era. The school itself is located across the street from the site of a former train depot, a place where tens of thousands of Jews were assembled and sent to death camps by the Nazis. Her students studied that traumatic history, and they've worked hard to create a memorial to those Jews. And they have a ceremony every year to keep alive that memory. And that's just one example of what Sabeth and her students have accomplished. So welcome, Sabeth. It's great to have you here, and maybe we can just start kind of from the beginning. You've worked on issues related to the Nazi era, racism and anti-Semitism since the 1980s. Can you tell us a little bit about your own story and what motivated you to dedicate yourself to this work?
Yeah, maybe I start with I'm now nearly 54, and I belong to the first generation in Germany who actually learned about the Holocaust at school. For example, my parents didn't know nothing about it when they were young. I know that my father's parents were Nazis, and I remember that quite often he and, well, my mother as well, were arguing with with their parents because they didn't want to talk about the Nazi era. And when I was a child, I quite often asked myself, what did my grandparents do during the war? And later, when I finished school, I started to work as a volunteer for the organization Action for Reconciliation and Peace. And I got the chance to go to Auschwitz, where I met Holocaust survivors. And I think to talk to them and to be at the historical place was, had a big impact on me. And at that time, I thought the work against anti-Semitism became more and more important for me.
Makes sense. You became a high school teacher, of course, and you've talked about the challenges you ran into teaching students about the Holocaust and Jewish history. Maybe could you briefly summarize what happened when you brought your students to the Dachau concentration camp in 2005 and what you realized from that trip?
Well, I said before that I was working for Action, Reconciliation and Peace before I became a teacher. And at that time, I took quite a lot of groups of young students to places like Auschwitz and Majdanek. And what happened to them was the same than it happened to me, that it had a big impact on them. And when I start being a teacher, and as you said, most of my students are not originally from Germany, and most of them are Muslims, some of them are Palestinians. I took them to Dachau, and what happened is that the class somehow split it up in two groups. The bigger groups were the students coming not from Germany, and the smaller groups, the real Germans somehow. And the students with the immigration background, they started to say, this is not our history, we have nothing to do with it. And on the other side, the German students said, well, they accused them for not behaving respectfully at this special place. And well, I had to face that even when we got back to Berlin, they were still arguing. And this was a really, terrible experience for me. And at that time, I decided that I didn't want to take the students to memorial places or things like that, because at that time I thought that the approach to German history I have chosen so far, it obviously didn't work with students with a migration background. That's what I thought at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you found a way to get past this challenge. I understand that it was, 10 years later, so a lot of thinking that went into this, but it sounded like you had a breakthrough, and it came when your students presented their own family histories. Can you briefly tell us what happened?
Yeah, it started that I about 10 years after I went to Dachau, I read a book with my students written by an Holocaust survivor. It called I Wore the Yellow Star. And what happened at that time was that actually some students start feeling sorry for the Jewish girl in the book, but at the same time they kept on saying that we don't like Jewish people. They are responsible that our family had to leave their home country Palestine, and somehow they 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 saw Jewish people as their enemies, I would say. And I found out that their own family story was more close to them and more important than the Jewish girl in the book. And they wanted to deal with their own history. And what we did is that we started a project where the students researched on their own family history. Like they were asking their parents about it, and they were collecting photos, and at the end they shared their history with their classmates. And one Palestine girl, she started crying while she was talking about her family, and she answered that never before she spoke to her classmate, no one have ever asked her to tell her story. So it was very new for her that somebody was interested in her family story, history. And at that time, I realized that we cannot expect young people to be interested for other people or even for other of the suffering from other peoples, as long as we don't perceive or acknowledge their own history. Yeah, and this was one reason why the idea came up that we went together to Israel.
Gotcha. So it started out with this realization that you had to show interest essentially in someone's background before you can ask them to show interest in someone else's. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me just ask, and let's get to the part about Israel. So you took your students on several trips to other countries, including Israel and Poland and Italy, I believe, that helped them to think differently about history. So maybe you could just talk briefly about how those trips motivated your students to do more. And particularly, I'd love to hear just a little bit about the trip to Israel and what that meant.
Yeah, as you said, we did, during the last 5 years, we did 5 trips to different countries, but I still think that the first trip to Israel was the most important for the students, because the one reason is that for most of them, it was the first time that they could talk to a Holocaust survivor, and they were very, very impressed by that. And the second reason was that they could see in Israel that it's possible that Jewish and Muslim people live together as friends, because before they always heard from their families they are our enemies and they are killing us or whatever. And yeah, they started to make a difference between Israel politics. You are free to be against this politics, but this has nothing to do with Jewish and Jewish people in general. And I think this makes them to be interested into anti-Semitism work.
So they were able to separate this idea of not agreeing
Yeah.
with politics and a separate idea, which would be, having anti-Semitic beliefs or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned earlier the memorial at the former train depot across the street from your school. This is a place where thousands of Jews were deported to death camps, and the memorial was only built only recently, and your students were asked to participate in the dedication of the memorial. Can you briefly describe what your students did and how they connected with the history?
Mm-hmm. Well, the picture you just showed looks quite nice, but before this memorial was created in 2017, it was a really unsightly and unreal place between 2 big supermarkets. And our problem was that it was very, very difficult for the students, for me as well, actually, to imagine what happened at that place 80 years before. And so what we did is that the students started to research the biographies of Jewish people who used to live in the neighborhood of our school and who were deported to the concentration camp from this station. And the students found out much more about this people than they thought they would, and this had the in that way they could link this place to people. They found the people behind the place, or behind the stories they read, and they can imagine what happened 80 years before, I think.
So it's really about getting individuals to learn about and really think about this as a piece of history that was about individual people rather than kind of a big idea in a way. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So let's do this. Now I want to play a portion of a virtual event we held in December because I'd love to hear from one of Sabeth's students. We know that video doesn't always play perfectly on Zoom, but we think this is worth it to try. And so we're also putting the full transcript of the video out in chat. So please look at the transcript if you have any difficulty following the video. So Sabeth, you were at our virtual event in December, and I want to play a clip now from your student, Christiana. At the event, she mentioned that your high school was a working school back during the 1940s, at the exact time when the train depot across the street was used to deport thousands of Jews. Christiana imagined what it would have been like as a student back then, sitting in her school, looking out the window as Jews were forced to walk to the train depot. And let's try and play that video clip now.
And not just that, but all the things happening in Germany, not just in Germany, but let's talk about Germany. All the things that are happening in this country right now, they scare me. They scare me. So when I look out the window, I think you have to know that this was a school back then already. So people my age, learning there, studying there, could watch thousands of people being pushed and trapped into wagons to drive into their destiny. And when I think of that, it makes me mad, it makes me sad, it makes me fearful, it makes me feel so much pain because I cannot understand how people were or are capable of doing something like that. I can never imagine how you can be able to push dozens of people, kicking them, beating them into a tiny wagon, knowing where they're going, and maybe even shooting them if they misbehave, if they naturally fight back. And that's something that really, before we did this whole thing, I was kind of living in my bubble. I didn't really care much about history, and I didn't really care much about things going on in the world right now because it wasn't affecting me. I was having my life. I look German. I don't have to live with racism daily. I'm privileged. I didn't have to flee a country. I didn't have to do any of that. I'm living my life. I was blind, basically. And that really opened my eyes because I could kind of feel what the people felt back then.
Wow. Just very impressive speaker. Wow. So before the pandemic, I also saw your students perform an original play about the Meyerowitz family, a Jewish family that included many members who died in the Holocaust. And the Meyerowitz family lived in the neighborhood where your school is. The play centers on Helen Meyerowitz, the matriarch of the family, who was murdered by the Nazis, although at least one of her children survived. Can you talk, Sabeth, just a little bit about what impact did working on this play have on your students?
I think doing this play was quite similar, like the research on the biographies, I guess, because it has also got to do that. Well, they also got to know the life of two persons. In this case, the lives of or the death of Helene and Martin Meyrowitz, and they did not only present the story, but they even present the feelings and the thoughts of Helene and Martin Meyrowitz. And so they get very close to these two people. And some of the students who were refugees themselves, for example, and who experienced persecution were even able to relate the story to their own family stories somehow. And for them, it became even more important to say, well, the Holocaust should never happen again, because they felt what it meant to be refugees or to be persecuted or something like that.
So as I understand it also, the granddaughter of Helen Meyrowitz actually came to the play. She met your students. Maybe could you briefly summarize what that meant to your students to be able to talk to the granddaughter of Helen Meyrowitz?
Meeting the granddaughter was very, very emotional, I think. And I think it was not just emotional for the students, but for the granddaughter as well. She is now about 68 or something. Mm-hmm. And because the students knew Martin and Helene, her grandparents, so well, it seemed for me that there was immediately a connection between the students and the old woman, the granddaughter, because it felt like they met before, because they knew the same people somehow. But at the same time, the granddaughter didn't know much about her grandparents. So it actually were the students who told her the story of her grandparents. And I felt, or I think the students felt the same, that somehow the students gave her back her own family's histories. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Wow. That's great. So Sabeth, thank you for telling that story and the others we've gone through here. We'll get back to you a little bit in the question and answer part of the event, but thank you. So now I'm going to introduce Friederike Fechner. There she is, who is joining us from the city of Stralsund on the Baltic coast. Good to have you. And in what was once East Germany, Friederike is a professional cellist and a member of Stralsund City Parliament. She has led Stralsund's efforts to document and commemorate its former Jewish community. Her work began with an extensive research on the 300-year history of the Bloch family, a Jewish merchant family that once owned a historic building that she and her husband purchased and restored. But Friederike is involved with much more than historical research and education, as you'll see. I want to start by playing a video clip now to give you a sense of what she's accomplished. And I should say the video clip is in German with English subtitles. It moves rather quickly, so we're going to put the transcript in the chat. So please look at the transcript if you have any difficulty following the video. The clip first shows Dirk Schleiner, an archivist that Friederike worked with in Stralsund. Then Casey Blake, a member of the Bloch family, who's here in the US, and then Friederike's husband, Martin. So let's take a look.
Frau Fechner kam vor einigen Jahren zu uns ins Archiv. Ihr Mann und sie hatten kurz zuvor ein Haus in der Heilgeiststraße erworben und wollten es sanieren und sind dann bei ihren Recherchen darauf gestoßen, dass es sich über viele Jahre im Besitz der jüdischen Familie Blach befunden hat. Und Frau Fechner wollte einfach mehr über diese Familie herausfinden und hatte uns um Unterstützung gebeten. Und daraus hat sich eben eine mehrjährige Zusammenarbeit entwickelt.
In February of 2016, Friederike Fechner emailed me to ask if I, by any chance, was the great-grandson of Julius Bloch. and she was trying to locate descendants in the United States. This email began a remarkable process of discovery or rediscovery for me and my family.
Es hat sie unablässig dann beschäftigt. Und je mehr sie wusste, desto mehr wollte sie wissen. Teils durch Zufall, teils aber auch durch systematische Suche hat sie das dann herausbekommen, wie groß diese Familie ist und wie weit die reicht, eben von Tel Aviv bis nach Los Angeles.
Wow. So with that introduction, I guess, Friederike, thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
And you heard what your husband said.
Yes.
Can you maybe briefly tell us what motivated you to become so dedicated to this work? Did you care about Jewish history when you were young, for example?
Well, history always was very meaningful in our family. My grandfather was a general in the Second World War, and so we talked a lot about history. And I think I was 12 years old when I first heard a word about the Holocaust, and this never has been mentioned at all in my family. And talks about the National Socialism, Nazi terror was always denied. And so I wanted to know more and began to be nosy. And so I ran in any Jewish museum when I was studying in the States. And well, that started my interest in particular. And in 2012, my husband and we bought this house in Stralsund, and I was asked to give a talk about the history of the house at the awards ceremony, because we got a prize, an award for the best restoration in the city in that year. And so I went to the city archive and researched the history of the house, and found out that it was former property of a Jewish family, the Blach family. And so I not only wanted to trace the history of the Blach family, I also wanted to get to know descendants, if there were any. And I found out that the grandson of Friedrich Blach was Casey Blake, who was talking here. And I got to know his email address and found out his email address, and yeah, Casey.
And that's how you got in contact.
Yes.
But it sounds like in a way was an area that you were interested in, but the fact that it was the Blach family was almost a coincidence. Maybe is maybe not the right word, but something like that. It wasn't that you knew that there was a story of a Jewish family in that building. You sort of found it. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
Whether I say that again, please.
Yeah, of course. So my understanding is that this was a little bit by chance that you ran into the story of this family. Because
yes, it was totally coincidentally. Yeah. And yeah, that's right. It was just.
Right. So let me move forward a little bit. So in the video, we have Casey Blake, one of the Friedrich Blach's grandsons. He told us about how you got in touch with him, and you just mentioned that as well. You've described what happened next over a period of months and years as sort of like putting together a puzzle. Could you just briefly summarize what you were trying to do for Casey and the other members of the Bloch family, and maybe what you found out?
Once I made the contact, I thought the family might like it when I sent them birth documents and marriage documents and certificates, and also photos of the Jewish cemetery, of the gravestones. And so I collected all this together and sent it to Casey. And at that time, I didn't know Christina, who was here at that time. I didn't know of her existence.
But as I understand it, as you learned more, you began to find more branches of the family, more parts of the family. So did I?
Yes. I mean, it was really like a puzzle. Friedrich Bloch had 6 children. 4 daughters were murdered in the Holocaust, and but sometimes their children survived. They could escape Nazi Germany. So I got to know all the other branches, and also got to know all the other contacts.
That makes sense. And let me, what I understand is that there were at least 5 branches of the family, and that each one was unaware that the others existed, that many of them had assumed that other members of the family had all perished in the Holocaust.
Well,
sort of?
Not quite right.
Okay.
The father of Friedrich Bloch was Julius Bloch, the founder of this leatherware store, and he had a brother, Felix. And I mean, Felix also had 2 sons, and there were family members of Felix as well. So it was really very widespread.
Got it. I mean, but I do have it right that a number of them did not know that the other ones.
No, they didn't. They didn't at all.
Yeah.
No.
So let me jump forward. Where I think we have a picture of this in 2018. There was an event that I find very moving at the German embassy in London. This is more than a dozen, as I understand it, more than a dozen members of the Bloch family gathered. These were people who came from different branches of the family in Europe and the US. And for many of them, this was the first time they'd met. And until your work, they didn't know one another existed. Could you tell us a little bit about how it felt to bring them together this way?
Well, I found out that they all were very grateful. I mean, everybody wrote so wonderful letters to me to thank me for connecting. And for me, it was an enormous release of tension, because until I did all this research, when I met Jewish people, I must say, I always feared to be neglected. I remember also when I was studying in the US, I had a very good Jewish friend, and she invited me to New York, and she asked her parents, and her parents said, "Sorry, we don't want any Germans," and so I wasn't allowed to come, and so I always had this fear to be to.
Do you mean to be sort of rejected because of your history?
Yes, and so all in a sudden, I just had so many friends, and they are all so wonderful people, and that made me incredibly happy.
That sounds like it was a very powerful experience for them and for you.
Yes, it was.
So you've gotten involved in remembrance work in your city. In fact, you founded the Initiative for the Memory of Jewish Life in Stralsund. Can you briefly tell us about this part of your work, and maybe give us an example of the projects you've been working on?
Yes, I mean, I have put so much energy into the research of the Blach family, and I thought it would be really very sad if this is just finished now. And I was so involved in also emotionally involved, so that I thought I would found this initiative to write a digital commemoration book together with a friend. I mean, we are about 15 people in this initiative, and we want to make former Jewish life in Stralsund more visible, and we want to have a lobby for the Jewish history in Stralsund. And this commemoration book is an enormous work. But I think it's wonderful for teachers and school kids to research,
and as I understand it, a large number of residents of the city are also involved in these efforts. Is that right? You brought other people to work on this kind of thing. Yes.
Well, we are 2 people to work on this commemoration book.
Sure.
And then we are, I mean, we have several things.
I meant that there's better awareness more broadly about the Jewish history. More people know about the Jewish history.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, we wrote a lot of newspaper articles, and so Jewish life of Stralsund is now really a topic. And
so I have one more topic I wanted to cover, if that's okay. But before that, I want to mention that I'm pretty sure at least one member of the Blach family is here in the audience today, Christina Oliver from Newton, Massachusetts. So thank you for coming, Christina. And let me use that to build on something. In the application for the Obermayer Award, we received a letter from another member of the Blach family, Kate Lanier, who lives in Santa Barbara and is Casey Blake's cousin. And I would love to share an excerpt from that letter. So let me just read it now. So visiting Stralsund and seeing the stumbling stones brought me to tears. We took flowers and laid them there on the street where my relatives had been taken away and murdered. Friederike allowed my family to have a moment of coming full circle as we visited the Blach house, saw the plaques she had put up there honoring my family and telling their story, and scattering some of my mother's ashes there in a pond. That's very powerful. Friederike, I know you have something you also wanted to tell us briefly about Kate Lanier's visit and Kate's mother. Please tell us.
Well, I was so moved that she brought the ashes of her mother to leave it in the lake just in front of our house. I think it's also very, very, yeah, it's so emotional. It was very emotional. And we did a real funeral celebration with candles, and Kate was talking to her mother, giving a speech to her mother, and it was just a very.
And am I right? You can see where her mother's ashes are from your window. Is that right?
Yes, it's a little bit dark. I can show you.
Let's see how it works. Okay, let's try it. So, let's see, let's turn this around. And if you can angle it just a little bit farther down and a little to the right. But anyway, so that's the garden. That's where her ashes are. Wow. So there you go. That's very powerful.
Maybe it would have been better if you had shown the picture.
No, it's fine, please. It's fine. Friederike, thank you so much for speaking with me. Thank you so much for speaking from the heart. I really appreciate your stories and your insights. I think it's time for me to open things up a little bit and let other people speak. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to do a question and answer part of the event. I'm going to ask both Friederike in a second and Sabeth to join me. And here's how it will work. If you have a question at any point, please raise your hand on screen so that a member of my team can see you. You won't need to keep your hand up very long. my colleague Maya will just need to take your name down on our queue and let you know that she has your name. Maya, how are we doing on time?
Joel, we have about 10 minutes for questions.
10 minutes, so it's not as long as we'd hoped. Well, let's get started then. And I should say, as you think of your own questions, I'm going to start with a question for both of our speakers, and then we'll open it up to everyone else. So as, let's see if we can, Maya, can you bring Sabeth and Friederike on? Okay, so I'll start my question, you can hear it as we go. So as the head of an organization that runs the Obermayer Awards, Sabeth and Friederike, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you both this question, which is, what has it meant for you to win an Obermayer Award?
Do you want to answer first?
Either one, that's fine. Friederike, you want to start?
Okay. Well, I was very, very much delighted, and I was very, very much delighted that the Blach family has suggested me to run into this.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I really appreciate the networking very much, because I'm meeting people who have the same background, who have the same interests, and working on the same projects. And I can ask them of financial support for certain projects. And
so you've been able to already begin to exchange some information with other people who are part of the network.
Yes.
Yeah.
We meet regularly and talk together.
Wonderful. Sabeth, how about you?
Of course, I was very happy as well, and was a great honor for me too. But now, 1 year later, I think the same than Friederike. The best thing is that we met so many different people who are all working in the same topic, and because we have different approaches to German history, I think it makes things even better, because we can get into an exchange and compliment
each other, sure. Yeah.
And this is one point that which is very important for me and a great thing. And the other thing is that I'm quite pleased that my work, and especially the memorial opposite of our school, became much more well known because I got the award, because people know the place now more. And during the last year, I got quite a lot of inquiries. Inquiries. Most of them are teachers who are asking me about the work with the students, but there are different organizations as well, and who are into memory work, who wants to do projects with the school. And I think this wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have got the award.
That's great. That's great. Okay, I think we should go ahead and open it up to others who may have questions. I'm going to start on the top of my queue with Christina Oliver, who's joining us from Newton, Massachusetts. And Christina, I'm going to actually ask you a question, then you can ask anything you want. Could you talk a little bit about what Friederike's work means to you? And then after that, maybe you feel free if you have a question.
For me, I thought that I didn't have any relatives who are alive except for my brother and my cousin Kate. I thought that everyone else had died in concentration camps. And to discover that I have more than 40 people alive and well around the world is unbelievable, including Ellen Levine, who lives in Newton Center, 5 minutes from here. Wow. And I've seen her, we've gone to their house. I mean, it's just extraordinary to be in a position where I have so many people who are now part of my heart. In fact, right just over these last few weeks, we've been trying to reach out to the last branch of the family that is in Brazil. And I'm working on it, but I haven't quite broken through. And this is all because of Friederike and also Martin.
Wow. Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate it. Kurt, Would you like to get your hands up? Let's unmute. If you can unmute and ask your question, let's go for it.
Thank you, Joel. And this has been a really moving and inspiring story, both on Friederike and Sabeth. And I just want to, first of all, thank Joel and Judith for the work they've done in putting this together. And of course, for the work of my friend, the late Arthur Obermayer, for the 20-some years of work he did on this. And it's inspiring to know that people are working to counter the anti-Semitism of the Holocaust. My question is to both of these women is, anti-Semitism was not a new creation by the Nazis. Existed among the Germans and the French and the Poles for 1,000 years. And now that the memory of the Holocaust is fading, particularly from the memories of younger people, to what extent, and keeping in mind the rise of the neo-Nazi movement in Germany and in other countries, to what extent do you feel that there is still widespread anti-Semitism among the masses of German people these days?
Sabeth, willst du antworten?
Didn't get the question exactly, actually. It's not a German, what it is.
So Sabeth, is the question about what do you feel about anti-Semitism among the masses in Germany right now? Kurt, does the question is sort of, well, go ahead.
I mean, it's obvious that anti-Semitism is increasing in Germany. And I think the dangerous thing is that there are at the moment a mixture of right-wing sided people who are, of course, yeah, who are anti-Semitism, yeah, we know, and that there are Muslim people who are anti-Semitic as well. And I said before that my students were not free from being against Jewish people, and I would never say that they were really anti-Semitic. I don't know what the adjective, but they were against Jewish somehow. And I think the important thing for, like me, for a teacher is to show them ways how they can stand up for their rights as foreign people in our countries without blaming Jewish people for what happened in the past with their families, that they learn that these are two different things. And I'm sure that that it's possible to teach this to young people, so that they are not being how do you say, instrumentalisiert.
Instrumentalized.
Oh, okay.
So you mean so that those views don't stick with them in a way?
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, great. We only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to keep going. I hope I pronounced everyone's name correctly. Lisa Grunberg? I know you put a question in chat, but why don't you join us and just
that in chat in case there wasn't a lot of time. So
no worries.
Question for Sabeth, just talking about how the parents of your students reacted to this play, because I had an experience in Bangladesh where there was some conflict between students from Sri Lanka, and they decided to do a play together. The university decided, and the women were asked to play the opposite side of the conflict. And they put the play on, and it was a great experience for the students, but there were parents in the audience who objected, said it wasn't fair, it wasn't presented correctly, were very upset that it was done. And I wonder if your parents object to your pursuing this with your students. And then for Friederike, I had a question about these programs not happening in countries that Germany annexed or allied with. And the Austrians have always kind of insisted they're victims of the Nazis, that they did not participate, when in fact they were very active participants. And I had spoken, I've had relatives have have stones laid in Germany, and I've been in contact with people about distant relatives getting stones laid. But for my immediate family, I've written a book about them. I've done quite a lot of research.
So, we don't have that much time, Lisa. So let's start with a question to Sabeth.
Okay.
If we could.
Um,
So Sabeth, what about parents? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the parents of my schools are very, very different. There are some who are not interested in in school at all, and they are not coming to any place or whatever the students do. Then there are some parents who really like the work that the kids do. For example, when we went to Israel, there were some students who said, no, I'm not going to Israel because I'm sure that my parents don't want me to go. And actually it were the parents who said, please go. It's so important for you to get to know the country of your grandparents. We have this as well. And of course we have people, what it means, of course, but we have parents who don't want the students to take part, their kids to take part in the working group, because they are really against everything which has to do with Jewish people. So everything is possible.
Yeah. Okay, great. And let me then ask Shula Reinhardt. I hope I pronounced your name right. Do you have a question?
I live in Brookline and knew Arthur and know Judy, and happy to know you now.
Very nice to meet you too.
Right. So I'm a descendant of the Jewish community of Gunzenhausen, which is in Bavaria. And there is a project there going on that's very similar, not entirely the same as Sabeth's. And so I would like to just ask Sabeth a question and Friederike. Sabeth, sure. Do you work with the same students year after year? Or is it every year a different group of students?
Well, the students are between 15 and 18 years old. So they start working with a working group when they are in the 10th form, and they finish after their A levels, but there are some who even still are at the group because even they are not at school anymore. So there's always some students who are there for 2 or 3 years, and there are some newcomers, and some of the students are leaving.
I think that's one of the keys to your success, that it wasn't a short thing like a class or a lecture, but a commitment of year after year. And I would like to ask Friederike a question. I have never heard of your town called Stralsund.
Yeah.
But what did you say?
The town founded in 1234.
Well, I guess I should have known that. But,
no worries, no worries.
Friederike, I love your story about learning about your house. And I was wondering if you have motivated other people to learn about their houses.
I try to motivate people to trace the history of their house, and so I think people have gotten more and more interest of getting to know who has lived in his house before.
But aren't some of them concerned that the Jews will want their houses back, or they have to pay Wiedergutmachung or something that would be unpleasant, or not?
Actually, I can imagine. Never ever anybody told me like this. I mean, it never
happened.
It never happened yet. Yes.
So great. And I'm going to interrupt now just for a second. So I want to make sure that those who have to end on time hour have a chance to end. Both of our speakers have offered to stay a little bit longer on Zoom. So Shula, if you have another question, and I know Lisa, we didn't have a chance to get to your second question, but if you want to stick around, I think we can get you an answer. But at the same time, I promise people who come here for an hour that they can get be at the full event for an hour. So let me wrap up, and then if you stick around, anybody wants to stick around with an extra question, that's fine. So thanks to everyone for those great, thoughtful questions, and thanks, of course, to Sabeth and Friederike. I know we may not have gotten, well, may not have gotten all your questions. Again, we will talk a little bit after for those who can. You can also feel free to contact me if you'd like to know more, and you can check out and learn a lot more about our work and awardees at our website, which is widenthecircle.org. I just want to close by telling you about another virtual conversation we'll be hosting on May 11th. We'll have guests from 2 innovative grassroots organizations that are responding to the rising tide of right-wing hatred in Germany and the US. One of the speakers is Raimund Grafe, the chairman of the Association of Erich Zeigner House. The Erich Zeigner House won an Obermayer Award this year. The organization does local history projects with students and educators in the city of Leipzig and in rural areas nearby. Many of these places are dominated, and they're really dominated, by neo-Nazis and the extreme far right. It's very tough stuff that they do. The second speaker will be Kate Bitz, program director from the Western States Center in Portland, Oregon, which is one of the US's foremost organizations when it comes to combating white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and other elements of the extreme far right. This should be a fascinating conversation. Will relate to a lot of issues around the history. And I should also say that the event on May 11th will be open to the general public. We'll be sending more details in coming days, but I hope you can come, and feel free to bring a friend. So once again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Sabeth and Friederike. I'd also like to thank everyone here in attendance. We appreciate that all of you carved time out of your day to join us, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. And this ends our formal program. Those of you who have other things to do, feel free to drop off. And those of you who want to stick around for a few minutes with a few more questions, we'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joel, can I ask you a question?
Sure, while we're waiting. Yeah, go for it.
You know, this is back when your dad was alive. Well, my family nominated Berkemann from Sobenheim for one of the awards in 2000. So I know that some of my cousins would probably be really interested in hearing what this program today. Is this going to be available for people to be able to?
So we're recording it, so we can certainly make the recording. In fact, I think our plan is to make the recording available to anybody who came. So we can certainly do that. And if there's anything else, you know, that would be helpful to let your people know about what we're doing, I'd be happy to talk about it further.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know that my cousins would truly be interested in
you know, we're just
knowing more.
We wouldn't be worth our name if we didn't you know, find any way that makes sense to get the word out.
Great, thank you.
So it looks like we still have a number of people here, and what I'm going to do, I think, is start. Lisa, is there a way you could maybe shortly summarize your second question? I know you had a question for Friederike, and I want to make sure that I don't pass over. So maybe we could just refresh with just a quick restatement, if that would be okay.
It's very kind of you. Just a question about other countries that were associated with the Nazis or strongly affiliated, like Austria, who have these programs, but even if you've done the research, want you to pay a researcher and pay to have the stones placed. And
so you mean just in a way that they're not dealing with it in quite the same way?
And is there any way Germany, since they are also kind of responsible in all of these countries, is at all pressuring them to change this policy? And also in Germany, any kind of footage or films of Nazi atrocities, if you want to use it in a documentary, you have to pay Germany to get those films.
So, and Lisa, I'll just be honest, Friederike, feel free to answer what part of this that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, we have other people on our network who anyway, I'm sure there's part of it we may be able to talk about here, but if there's more you want to know, we certainly can find answers. Friederike, go ahead, whatever you're comfortable with talking about.
Actually, about those things, I'm not, I don't know about. I would love to know more, and if you could send me an email, and if I could maybe answer your question more properly than now, because I don't know about those
Thank you. If you want to put your email in the chat, that's.
Or actually, Lisa, if you want to just let us know your email, we could do, if you do that in the chat, we can make sure to connect the two of you.
I mean, if I also didn't get your question not quite right. Did you ask who's going to pay for the Stumblestones as well, or?
I think this was about film footage, but I think we should move this one to email only because I think it'll be simpler. But let's keep going. Shula, did we get through all your questions, Shula?
Well, I would like to say that my third little point was not a question.
Ah.
But it was
okay.
something that I'm involved in now that might be a nice idea for somebody to consider doing. And that is, in this town of Gunzenhausen, they have a project that's a little bit similar to Sabeth's.
Mm-hmm.
And the students show visitors to the town whose ancestors lived in the town,
right.
Show them films that they made about the houses in which people live. So it connects also to you, Friederike.
Oh,
but what is amazing to me is the person who has organized a lot of this lives in Israel, and he has created with a therapist in Gunzenhausen a project where 8 of us whose families come from Gunzenhausen and 8 people who currently live in Gunzenhausen, we talk together in a kind of group every 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it is incredible.
Wow, that's
so
great.
Current residents with descendants.
Wow,
that's nice.
And then what happens is we come up with projects all the time that we want to do. And so it grows all the time in a very nice way.
Wow,
so,
that's wonderful, wonderful idea. Thank you.
If you want to know more, I can tell you and give you the names of the people who run this project.
I'd love to know. Yes,
I'd
love to know more.
I'll let Joel put us together.
For sure. And I will just tell you, Shula, that those sound like the type of people that would make sense to be part of this network we're building. So we'd be happy to hear more for sure.
Okay.
I'm just trying to see if we have any more questions. Any more questions? I don't see any from the list my team has come up with, but feel free to, let me make sure I can see everyone, to raise your hand if you have something.
I think Hank might have had a question, Joel.
Okay. No, he's nodding his head not. So, okay.
Oh, okay.
Anyone else? Oh, do I see Dorothy?
I do.
Oh, so Hank and Dorothy, I see.
I can make this a question. There was someone asked a question related to for Sabeth, for your students, and about whether there were troubles getting them, whether they were allowed to participate in whether there were problems with their parents. And I remember you telling a story about one of your students who did have troubles, and I think I may have heard them tell the story themselves partially in a video. I was wondering if you could tell that story.
Yeah, this was when about this Palestinian girl. She wanted to come to Israel, but her parents didn't allow her. And what happened is that before we went, I made a sort of information evening for the parents, so they would know what we are going to do in Israel. And she told her father to come, but she didn't tell him that it was not a usual parents' evening assembly, but it was all about the trip to Israel. And because her hope was that when he was there, he would be convinced that she can come with us. And so he was sitting there, and he got more and more angry from minute to minute. And I thought, oh, that's because she told me just a few minutes before the event started that her father is coming and that he doesn't know what's going on. And I thought I had to convince him now. But what happened was that the other Muslim, not even Muslim, but Palestine parents, they started to convince him that it's a big chance for his daughter to go to Israel and to get to know the country. And at the end of the evening, she was allowed to come. So she came with us.
That's great.
Great.
Thank you for asking that question, Hank. And did I get that right? Dorothy, did you have a question? I thought I saw. You're muted, so I can't hear it, but if. Yep, still muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, okay, now I'm on. So
Okay,
no,
Dorothy, go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I want to tell some of the people who started with these projects that I've been doing this over 30 years. And when we started, it was really difficult because that was something really new, even in a big town as Wiesbaden, is the capital of the state of Hessen. But we started and we are still going on. I mean, we keep going, being in touch with the former Jewish population of Wiesbaden all over the world, in Australia or wherever, and have been able to invite people to come who always said, no, never again will we go to Germany and no, not to Wiesbaden. So the overall experience is that if you keep up and work on it also with the next generation of students and teachers, then you can really make it a valuable part of your city or town cultural life. That is something we were able to achieve over the years, as I said, over decades.
And just to be, so that's very impressive. I would just say, just to be clear, there are many groups, different levels of activity and so on that involve making residents of an area in Germany, a town usually, connected with the descendants.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've seen over and over again from our awardees. And I think that's partly because if you want to reach reconciliation or you want to reach some kind of change, the only people to reconcile with are the descendants. All right, listen, I think that we've gotten to all of our questions. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, everyone else. I appreciate everyone sticking around for a little bit more conversation, and appreciate your interest. And I hope we see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's up to you.
Thank you very much.
And feel free to unmute if you want to say bye. It's always often a nice thing.
Bye, Friederike.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, and thank you.
Thank you, Hank.
We'll talk soon, Friederike.
Yeah.
Yes, I call you later.
Oh, good, good.
Christina, thank you so much for joining us.
All right.
Oh, thank you so much.
And Joan and
Make sure Ellen gets the tape.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then Joan and Ron, thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
And here we go. Carnes, thank you for coming.